the Democratic Party right now, there's a lot of distrust and a lot of people who felt like they were lied to about Biden's condition. So they want to overcorrect and really show a lot of transparency.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by congressional reporter Samantha-Jo Roth. SJ, President Biden's been back in the news this week. Some bad news about his health, but the bad news about his health has raised a lot of other questions, both about him and about people suffering from a similar condition. Talk a little bit about what you've written on this.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of information coming out of this diagnosis. You know, a lot of Democrats, privately behind the scenes had, been raising concerns about his health for a long time. So, it's definitely a little unsettling. There's been a lot of questions about, whether, I wrote a piece yesterday talking about the testing that is needed for this kind of cancer, for prostate cancer. And there's, an outroar of people being like, is this medical malpractice? Because
Right.
he hadn't had one since 2014. When we spoke to some medical experts about this, actually it's pretty rare that they recommend that somebody of his age actually gets this kind of screening, and the screenings typically are not the best. It is interesting, though, that President Trump is someone who has had this screening. But, it definitely raised some questions about whether this is something that he had while he was in office or not. I did speak to an oncologist and a screening specialist at Johns Hopkins who says that he sees people with the kind of cancer that Joe Biden has all the time, people whether they had been screening for years or not. And sometimes it just happens, and it's, an extremely aggressive form. So, whether it was hidden or not is another question. We're really not sure.
So you've also written about how this could affect Democrats who are going to be running for office both next year and in 2028 as a potential Biden successor. They're going to be facing a lot of these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the Democratic Party right now, there's a lot of distrust and a lot of people who felt like they were lied to about Biden's condition. So they want to overcorrect and really show a lot of transparency. There's a big group of donors who are saying, you know what, we're not going to give money to a candidate unless we take a look at your health records. And, maybe this isn't necessarily about age, but it's about, whether you are someone who is, has it in them for a run like this, because obviously we see, President Trump, who's going to be the oldest president in office eventually, and he's, seems to be doing quite fine. So everybody at different ages does things differently. But I think, Democrats are really going to be pushing for a lot of transparency from their officials moving forward. And this isn't just in 2028. I mean, this is even Senate, House. We've had a number of House Democrats who have died in office, including this week. And there are some serious implications that come with it, including, the reconciliation bill was able to be passed partly because unfortunately, Representative Connolly passed away this week, and there were a couple of Republicans who were missing. So it kind of, it's definitely
lowered the threshold.
Yes, exactly. And it illustrates the problem right there that, when you have margins this thin, you really can't have people who are dying in office. And that's the message that I'm hearing from a lot of Democrats. And, they're ready for transparency, and they're ready for a candidate who is, up for the challenges that come with running for office. And that means taking votes, that means going to committees, that means presiding over committees and, doing your job.
So speaking of reconciliation, all of the fun has been on the House side. It's about to cross over to the Senate side real soon. So what are some of the things you expect?
Well, I definitely think that the deficit hawks on the Republican side in the Senate, they really need to be won over. A lot of them have been very clear that they are not happy with what they are seeing on the House side. Some of those deficit hawks on the House side were able to be swayed. I think you're looking at a tougher group on the Republican side, but I also think, I was talking to Senator Kevin Cramer today, who's one of the most chatty of them all, and he said, I think it's going to be a fight, but at the end of the day, it'll pass. I think that we can get these people to to be able to be satisfied. So I do expect that that's going to be the end result, but I do think it's going to be a little messy to how we get there.
Right.
But that's just going to be something that we're going to have to monitor in the weeks, and maybe we'll see weeks ahead.
Right, weeks ahead, months ahead.
Yeah.
But I mean, at least with it being reconciliation, there's no possibility of a filibuster, and so they don't need any Democrats to vote for this.
Right, they don't. But they still need some within their ranks to support it. And, there's some hardliners who don't love the deficit issues. You have some people who are a little concerned about the Medicaid work requirements and cuts. So you're going to have to satisfy all of those people. But I mean, I think, what we saw on the House side, it is challenging with that, thin of a margin. They were able to do it. So, I would expect that they would be able to do it, but only time's going to tell.
Time will tell. Thank you, SJ.
Thank you.
You can read Samantha-Jo and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.